Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with another 1/35th scale workable track link review and tutorial video. The subject matter of this one's a bit different compared to some of the other tutorial videos that I've done in the past, where those models I had to go with an aftermarket workable track link solution because the kit had either individual link and link tracks, which of course are garbage, or they had a single piece vinyl track that just dry rotted and burled up into oblivion, so a replacement was going to be required. This one here is a bit different because what we have here is a Hobby Boss 1/35th scale T29 American Super Heavy Tank kit. Kit itself is absolutely awesome. I love it. In fact, this is going to be the subject matter of its own model showcase video, which will probably be posted before this video here makes its debut. But regardless, what's unique about this kit is that out of the box, this kit gives you a set of workable track links. So, since the vehicle does have workable track links, I might as well make a tutorial video on how to assemble these, just in case you are interested in purchasing this kit, or you have one and you're just trying to figure out what's, the best way to go ahead and assemble the tracks that are supplied with this model. So to start with the actual build itself, you'll notice at this point here the tank is about 99.9% complete in terms of the remainder of the external details. The thing's been painted, it's been varnished, and at this point here it just needs one or two small little accessories in order to wrap it up. And it's always at this point of the build is when I actually start my track link assembly. This is a bit different in contrast to some other people out there where they build it while the model is going through its construction. Me personally, I like to do it at the very tail end of the build because when the model is at this point here, I can actually get the appropriate length and tension set as opposed to before that where it's a little bit more complicated. Specifically with the way I like to build my models, the wheels are not installed onto the model during construction, and this is done just so that I can get the inner areas on both the hull and the wheels themselves thoroughly primed, painted, and in terms of rubber tires, getting the rubber tires also thoroughly painted. As I usually mention, I like to paint the backs on either side as well as also the inner recesses, and this is much more easily done when the things are unassembled as opposed to when they are fully assembled and, even worse, fitted to the model. So because of that, trying to assemble a workable track link at that earlier stage is not really beneficial. Also, while on the topic of the wheels, you'll notice that at the time only the main row wheels have been installed in place. This doesn't really cause any problems, but you'll see that the return rollers only have the backings fitted at this time. This is going to come into effect when it comes time for final installation. You'll see exactly how much more easier it makes the job compared to if the idler, or I should say the return rollers, are fully assembled with their outer extremities. Also at this time, you'll see that the only thing missing is the sprocket and the front idler wheel, and again, you'll see how that comes into effect after the tracks are fully assembled and are ready for final installation. So with that out of the way and with the model placed aside, let's go ahead and actually look at the track links that are supplied with this kit. Separated from the bag. By the way the kit is designed, you have two sets of tracks individually bagged, so I presume basically it's going to be one group here for each of the sides. So with this one here debagged, you really get to see the look of the moldings themselves. Moldings are excellent quality, as which one would expect for a kit made in the modern era. And these kits here, or I should say these tracks here, aren't offered for sale as an aftermarket source. They are just solely supplied with the T29 kit that we have here. But regardless, they are very nicely detailed. They kind of remind me of the AFV Club tracks in a few ways. And whoa, don't leave just yet. Don't leave just yet. Those tracks are the bane of a lot of people out there. They just absolutely hate them. I actually did a video where I was able to properly assemble them, and you see exactly what to watch out for to prevent the type of problems that most people have with those tracks. But that's a topic for literally that other video. For this one here, when I'm referencing the AFV Club tracks, I'm actually referencing the tracks for the M48 family, which has the center guide tooth integrally molded onto the link itself. On some other tracks out there, the center guide tooth is actually molded as a separate component, and this is a piece that needs to be sandwiched in during the track link assembly. And that does have some benefits to it. It does have more of a realistic articulation as opposed to something here where it's stuck to the link, but this one has the advantage of being easier to put together. The track links themselves are molded in this brown plastic, and this is something that I've seen quite often done on a few of the other makers out there, from Trumpeter, which Hobby Boss is literally just trumpeter with the Scooby-Doo mask on. But I've also seen even AFV Club, their tracks are a similar shade of brown, although the material is different than this one here. This one just appears to be their standard trumpeter tier of polystyrene, as opposed to the AFV Club links, which were another type of polystyrene, but were far more frail compared to this one. But regardless, so we have the track links, we have the chevron detail integrally molded on, which is great. And you can see the little pegs here where the guide teeth, or I'm sorry, the end connectors plug onto. And this is something that you always have to pay attention to as a builder, because these things are fairly frail. Even with this type of plastic here, these parts are the weakest point on the link and can break if you are manhandling them. So that's one thing to be aware of. On the end connectors themselves, we have these sections right here. As you can see, they are integrally, or I should say molded hollow, which is great. And because this is a T29, we have a bit of extra equipment compared to a standard M26 Pershing or M46 patent type link, where in those we just have the same end connectors but on either side. On the T29 series, it was unique in that it actually had duckbill extenders, and you can see the duckbill extenders right over here on this side of the sprue. Just like with the other parts, they are molded hollow, which again is going to aid in assembly. Also supplied with this kit is this little assembly jig that we have right here. This is on one of the sprues. It's actually one of the major sprues found on this kit, where it contains a multitude of the details for the upper hull, and I believe a few details for the turret. I think it's runner number C, if I'm not mistaken. Regardless, it is supplied, and this should be beneficial when it comes time for the actual assembly of these tracks. To assemble the tracks, I'm going to be utilizing the standard track assembly tools that are seen in the other videos. That would include a nice pair of clean cut snips, a bottle of thick super glue, some sandpaper. This I believe is 220 grit if I'm not mistaken, a X-Acto, or in my case I just use a miniature snap blade utility knife, as well as a flat needle file. All of the tools that you see on this table here are basic modeling tools and are found in most people's toolboxes, specifically if you build plastic models. Otherwise, if you are looking to buy these things, they're really easily obtained on places like Amazon. Some other tools that would definitely help in the build in case an emergency arises are what you see here on the table. Now, these are just a accessory type thing. They are not mandatory to assemble the tracks, but if you do run into a situation, the tools here will definitely be of good use. So we have here a pair of wire snips. Now these are different from the clean cut snips that I just mentioned. Those are primarily used for plastic. For what I'm going to be mentioning here, the metal wire cutters are going to be much better for this type of application. We have some small sewing pins. These can be found in basically any craft store, or again on Amazon. Everything's on Amazon. This over here is a micro Dremel bit. This one here is a number 72, or specifically it's a 0.0250 inch bit. I'm sorry I can't help you out there if you are metric inclined, but regardless, these bits are purchased through the vendor listed in the video description below, and you can also see the link popping up right here on the bottom portion of the screen. It's the vendor where I get all of my micro bits from. And on top of that, a pin vise for good measure. And the final tool that I forgot to mention that's actually going to be a little bit handy to have is a small precision pair of pliers like the ones that you see here. So off camera, I went ahead and assembled one whole band of track. And it's a good thing I did, because after work on this track, I did see several things to mention, and it's best that I go ahead and do one at the dry run before I actually go ahead and show the construction. Regardless, the track goes together pretty well. The track links themselves, I should say the packs do give you more than enough for a single length. However, you are very limited with the amount of spares that you have, so it's not like some other sets out there where you have a decent number of spares. This one here at the end, you basically have what's seen here on the sprue. There would have been one extra link as spare, but that one sadly just didn't hold up to the rigors of construction, so we just have the 5 here that are on the runner that are left. And the other thing I do want to mention is that because of the sheer length of the T29, the track links are way longer compared to, you know, your standard typical type vehicle. On average, and this is true for Shermans, Tigers, and even the standard Pershing, you're looking at roughly about 75 to about 85 links by and large to make it a solid track length. On the T29 here, on the instructions it says 113, and what you see here are literally 113 links all lined up and assembled in this format. Once assembled, the tracks are functional, as you can see, and you know, they basically have the type of articulation that one would expect to see on many other tracks that are similar to this that are on the market. And by the most part, they go together pretty well. However, there are some things to watch out, and I discovered it as the plot did thicken a little bit during the construction. So I'm just going to go ahead and get that out of the way right now. The one thing that these tracks do have a slight issue with, or at least on the example that I'm building, is with timing on the sprocket. And when it comes to tank models, sprocket timing, it is probably the most important thing to consider. And on this one here, the fit is actually a bit rough on the sprocket. When you try to take the stock sprocket and wrap the track around, it's going to time for the first 2 or 3 links, but then after that, they're going to hang up and they just don't interlock into the sprocket tooths as they should, or even as several of the other models that I brought reviews on the channel in the past. If you try to just force it in, this is just going to result in you breaking the pins that hold the end connectors together, and that is definitely something that's less than ideal. So on this example over here, what I went ahead and did was I took a needle file and I carefully ground down a handful of the teeth that are going to be covered up by the track when the sprocket is fitted in place. Normally, this is a procedure that I really don't like to do, and generally you don't want to do this type of a procedure, but with the circumstances that I have here, it's really the only choice. If I go ahead and take the track and wrap it, you can see how much better it'll fit now. So yes, when I was trying this, I did break a few links, which is why I had to do some quick repairs on them. And this is very noteworthy because you don't have that many spares, so I actually broke more links trying to mess around with the sprocket than I actually had spares of. So yes, you know, doing this type of a procedure is going to be basically mandatory to put one of these kits together. And hopefully this comes out on camera, but it's really hard to hold up in this angle. But you can see just how much better the track intersects with the timing on the sprocket with those few sections removed. Fortunately, with the way these tracks are, you do not see the teeth because of the way the duckbills are found in these areas over here. So removing a little bit of material in those sections is more than enough to achieve basically the result that you're looking for, where the sprocket times properly with the track, and visually it also has the complete look. I did not go ahead and do the procedure yet to my other sprocket. I am going to be doing that off camera. Maybe I'll take you guys along to show the procedure. But regardless, the teeth are only adjusted for about 5 or 6 of them, and it's basically around the curve section where you want to have the track with its articulation. So from this point where the track first makes contact with the sprocket to about this point over here where the track goes into a descending angle, those are the teeth that you want to go ahead and do the modification to. Matter of fact, having said that, probably going to make 1 or 2 slight tweaks to these 2 teeth over here, but that remains to be seen. The other thing I want to mention is that the track, and this is true for many other plastic track that are out there, specifically ones from Trumpeter, is that in this type of motion, they're pretty durable. However, in a canting type motion, like going left or right, this is where they become very, very vulnerable and can break very easily. And on top of that, to compound things, because of just how long these tracks are, lateral motion is something that can easily happen. Specifically when, you know, you're wrapping around the sprocket, as you saw, or even when you're trying to install it on the vehicle, or even painting it. You do have to be very, 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 very careful, because once these things snap, now you're going to have to go ahead and do some repairs. As for articulation though, as you can see, they snail up pretty well. And once they're in this format over here, they tend to be a bit more safer. So that's why I tend to leave them in that format. So let's go ahead and actually start with the assembly tutorial. So the first thing you're going to want to do is to remove the links off of the sprue. And this is just done with your pair of clean cut snips. Simply just snip them away, and the pieces should just drop right out, like so. Unlike the AFV Club track links, this is where the AFV Club ones were much more fragile and frail. Because these ones have the tooth integrally molded on, it makes the track a little bit more robust, and if we recall from the AFV Club one, you kind of have to like carefully snip the same amount of material away off each side until the track link eventually just falls off because of the tiny little pins that are securing the whole link together. On the trumpeter one here, or the Hobby Boss example, that's just not the case. You can just simply snip them off in the timely manner like I just did. So once they are removed, just go ahead and snip away the remainder of the sprue sections. And at this point here, you're ready for the actual next step. Once the links are removed, the next step is to go ahead and thoroughly deburr them. And this is basically the biggest chore of these tracks, and it's no different than any other individual type track link option on the market, be it the cancerous indie link tracks or any number of the workable track links from the various makers that I've mentioned in the past. The first thing I'm going to do before I even start the deburring process is I'm going to take a needle file and I'm going to hit either side here of the guide horns. With the way the kit is designed, the tolerances on these components here fit okay, but on some occasions there may be a small little lump of plastic. It's a very small one, and that could potentially tighten up the tolerances, which will really inhibit the track from moving. So what I like to do is, before I go ahead and actually start with the deburring process, with a needle file, I just go up and down these sections here with 1 or 2 passes. Nothing much. You don't want to remove too much material. You know, just a few passes just to free things up slightly. As for which ones have the lump of plastic, it really depends where on the runner I found that they are. But just as a quick rule of thumb, you might as well just throw the baby out with the bathwater on this one and just, do the procedure to all of the links, as generally opening up tolerances on track links tends to make the assembly go by a bit easier and also makes the tracks just flow a little bit better with the tolerances loosened up. And oddly enough, this was also some of the cause of breakage on the AFV Club links. And if we can recall in that video, I had to do a procedure very similar to this. One other thing to mention is that at this time, the track links are very vulnerable, and you could easily pop off one of these small little frail plastic pegs that you see here. And if that happens, you're going to have to do the repair utilizing the pin vise, that small little Dremel bit that I mentioned before. You basically drill out the area where the pin once was, and then with the sewing pin, you glue it in place, and now you have your replacement pin. The sewing pin is the exact same size as the plastic one over here, so once it's installed, the track link is, for the most part, repaired. And it's stronger than it was before, admittedly. Okay, so once that's taken care of, it's now time to deburr the remaining sections of sprue that were removed. So to remove the burrs further, I'm going to use some sandpaper, and I'm actually using 320 grit. I may have made a mistake earlier with the type of sandpaper that I mentioned, but 320 grit is the one that I use for the other set that you saw before. So basically, I'm just going to go ahead and polish down the remaining sprue burr. Just a few passes. Again, it's really all you need. On this one over here, you want to make sure you go in an even pass, and you don't want to spend too much time on it, or else you'll remove a little bit more material than you would like from the top portion of the track. Fortunately, it's not that important, but there is within reason. So basically, like the way you see it over there is really all you need. And one other thing I like to do is with an X-Acto, I just like to clean up the little section over here where the filing took place. And at that point there, this link is ready for assembly. So I'm just going to go ahead, take the jig, and just line this guy up on the jig, as you can see. And I'm just going to go ahead and repeat the same cleanup steps to the following track links, and then let's cut across to when the set over here is actually ready for assembly. So this is where orientation is going to become absolutely crucial on many, many fronts. First, with just on the location of the duckbill. Unlike a standard M26 Pershing or even any other vehicles outside of the Sherman, when this one here has duckbills, and because of that, you need to have a specific right and left hand track. So since I have this track here already assembled, It would be in this type of orientation. The duckbills on this whole track link are going to have to be added to this side. This is very, very important for a reason that should be fairly obvious. If you go ahead and just go through the motions and build the track with the duckbills all on the same side, you're going to have a bit of a problem. So this is something you have to pay attention to. The second thing why you need to pay attention to is that with the way the kit is designed, you're just supposed to take these end connectors and just stick them in place, and then your track is assembled. Unfortunately, on all of the tracks that utilize this system, the byproduct is that the tracks are very flimsy and they tend to fall apart very, very easily. Even though the pieces seem snug, nah. After a bend or two, they tend to work themselves loose and the thing falls apart on you. So in order to prevent this, I do glue the two end connectors onto the track. However, I add it to a certain location, which will keep the piece anchored in place, but it will prevent it from loosening out during assembly and installation. And on top of that, it does not refrain in any way the mobility of the track, so the track is still functional and it's not static individual link and length. So, I mean, that would be really anticlimactic if it was. But if this system works really well, and I've used the system and showed on many, many of these videos. However, just like I always mention, the key to this is to know which one of these pegs you glue the connector to, because if you mix up, then you're going to run into issues. But if you keep the same format, you should be okay. And it's this reason why the jig here is very important, because it will definitely aid in keeping your orientation correct. So with all that out of the way, I'm now going to go ahead and snip off the end connectors off of the runner. And one thing I like about the end connector design on the sprue is that once this thing gets in focus, you will see that we have the end connector right here. And you notice there's that little T section that's molded directly on the top. This is an excellent little bit of engineering, because what this does is this helps align your clean cut snips here, and it actually shoves the snips as close as possible to the end connector. And this will have the result of having a very clean, or most clean cut as you could possibly get. Generally, when you snip these off, they tend to have a little bit of a burr that sticks out of them. But in this one here, the burr is mitigated immensely. There is still going to be some cleanup required, of course, but it's much less compared to some of the other options on the market. And it's all thanks to that tiny little T section that's molded in. So that's a nice little clever bit of engineering. I wanted to point that out. The other thing I want to point out is, again, has to do with the orientation. You got to know which side is up. So this part here of the end connector, this is the part that's on the outside of the track. On the reverse side, there's a small little pin right there. And of course, on the real track, this would be the bolt, and the nut in the bolt that, secure the wedge pin in place and keeps the whole thing as one unit. As you can see, when you line up the clean cut snip, it indexes perfectly on that little T, and allows the part to be cleaned off very, very quickly. And uniformly on top of that. Alright, so I'm going to snip off 4 of these sections. With the way the set is designed, you could assemble 4 links, or I should say 5 links, in a pop, but you need 4 end connectors in order to just secure them in place. So with the end connectors snipped away, it's now time to snip off the duckbills. The duckbills do not have that T-type setup, and you just snip them off basically as close as you can to the bottom base itself. With the design of the part, it kind of self-levels itself, so that's good in that regard. With the sections removed, on the duckbills, I like to polish them up with some sandpaper before the assembly, because once they are fully assembled onto the track like this, they become very frail just because of the long length of them, and trying to sand them off at that point potentially can put harm and stress onto the pins, which is definitely something you don't want to do. So, just one quick little extra step. You take the duckbill and you just go up and down on the sandpaper over here, just for a few passes, and then the piece is polished away, as you can see. Once that's all taken care of, it's time to begin the actual assembly. The one beauty about the jig is that not only does it help align the parts with their chevron, but it also helps align them with the track toots. And so the pieces are non-symmetrical, which is excellent. So on the track bands over here, what I like to do is I like to add a drop of glue on only one of these pins, like I mentioned before. So let me see if I can pick this up in one unit. Okay, so with the way I like to do it is, I'll go this way. You have the tooth here, and the drop of glue I like to add is on this portion here of the pin. So if the track tooth is on top, I put the drop of glue on the second pin, and I do this on every single one of these. This will have the effect of, again, securing the end connectors in place, but allowing the part to still pivot. The other thing, again, you have to pay attention to is the orientation of the duckbills. I cannot stress that enough. So on this example over here, we have the finished track band. So let's flip it around. Okay, so as you can see, the track now is in the exact same orientation. Only in this one here, the duckbills are on this side. So on this whole set here, I'm going to focus on keeping them on this side. Pull you up out of the way. All right, good. So here we go. I'm going to add the drop of glue again to the, and it also helps if the glue is cleaned off. Give me one moment. And connect, or I should say the applicator is just a bit cleaned off. You don't want any spludge on it. Could, you know, cause problems. All right, so with that all out of the way, it's just a very small, finite amount of glue. As you can see, I am very, very, very conservative with that. That's it. And then from here, I just take the end connectors. And again, you want to make sure the end connectors are at the proper orientation. The part with the blade on it is on the bottom. This is the top part. And you just slide it in as such. When you slide it on, you want to make sure that the part is nice and flat. You don't want it kinked or nothing. This would, you know, cause some problems. So everything is nice and straight like that. And is properly aligned. And that is it for that. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side. Again, remember, you want to apply the glue on the exact same location. So the second pin, and second pin. Make sure the appropriate point is facing upward on the connector. And you just install it in place. These pieces do fit on pretty well. You just have to make sure you line them up appropriately. And again, the jig aids in this immensely. Funny, every time I'm doing these type of tutorials and this procedure, I always think of Wile E. Coyote trying to put the pin back in the hand grenade. Okay, there we go. At this point here, you want to set it aside and you want to let it dry. As you just saw, what could possibly happen. If you move the part while the glue is still setting, the end connectors could slightly work themselves loose a little bit, and then they'll set, but they won't set flush against the track link, and this could potentially cause alignment problems. So at this point here, you just want to set it aside and let it dry. Part of the reason why I like to use super glue, because super glue does set fairly quickly. Even though this is the slow cure stuff, it still sets pretty quickly, and after like a minute or so, I could go ahead and safely remove this section off of the runner and continue. Or actually off the jig and continue. Generally when you're assembling at this point here, this is when you just simply remove another batch of track links off of the sprue and go through the sprue removal and hand fitting process, because by the time those are done, the glue should be set enough to the point where you can assemble your next set of track. At this point here, we can see the band that I assembled earlier. This one I took care of off screen, and this set here are all polished up and ready for assembly. So when it comes to final assembly, you can do it in two ways. You can either just go ahead and string up an entire row, basically is how I did the last one, or if you're more comfortable, you could just do them in 5 link segments and then just pin them together, creating the set. Both ways will basically give you to the exact same end result. However, you want to be careful with going with that method because, again, you have the instructions recommend 113 links, and that doesn't exactly divide into 5 evenly. So you want to keep track of the amount of links that you're assembling just so it prevents any sort of accidents from happening. But regardless, when you are ready to pin the tracks together, they're done in the exact same procedure. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and pluck this guy off of the jig. The sets look great. Let's quickly compare and contrast them to the other ones. Perfect. You can see that the pieces are a mirror image. So at this point here, we're going to go ahead and start with the assembly. To assemble them, I am going to, again, add the drop of glue on the location that would be the second pin as before. So I'm going to add a drop of glue on this guy right here. I'll add a drop of glue on the other guy momentarily. At this point, I could go ahead and just slide this guy in place. Like so. At this point here, I'll add the drop of glue. And then just carefully pin this guy. Just like so. And there you have it. So now we went from 5 links to 10. Set this guy aside, let him dry, and I'll assemble the next track band. Keep doing this, rinse, wash, repeat, until finally you have 113 links. So, after a little bit of time, you can see both tracks are now fully assembled. The second one went by a lot faster than the first. That always happens with these workable tracks. You know, you first start out, and then by the end of the first one, you really get your groove, and you just become like a robot, and you get that muscle memory in line. Next thing you know, the entire second band goes together a bit easier, and always better than the first. It always seems to work out that way. On this one here, I had excellent luck, knock on wood, and the tracks were perfect. I didn't have any breakages. I didn't have to drill out any pins. Nothing among the sort. This one here was a different story. I broke a bunch of pins, but that was, again, trying to make sure the thing was timing right, which led to the discovery that I mentioned before, but that's neither here nor there. The track, as you can see, it's nice and flexible, which is exactly what you want. But it's not quite done yet. The next thing I need to do before I can get this one ready for paint, this one's actually ready to go, is I need to go ahead and just lightly sand over the end connectors. Even though clean cut snips are utilized, you are still going to have a slight remnant of a burr left over on the part that needs to be polished away. And to do this, this is a very risky procedure, I might add. You can easily snag something and break something, and then things cascade really quickly. And with the way these tracks are assembled, if one link breaks, it tends to snowball quite quickly. So the best thing to do if you want to, you know, live on the wild side is to take the 320 grit sandpaper. Actually, it'd be best to have a bigger panel. Hang on, let me go ahead and grab one. So I'll just use the whole panel right here. This is one of those things where the bigger the panel, actually, the easier the procedure. It takes less rotations. So let me just clear off the table a little bit. All right. This guy I'll move out of the way. Carefully set him aside. That's something else I'm going to go over momentarily. Okay, so in order to do the procedure, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to roll up the track into a snail. And this will actually have the benefit of giving the track a little bit more extra support. It kind of like so each link supports each other, as opposed to doing it in a lateral line like this where you could potentially break something. So I'm going to carefully just sit here and roll this guy up. Don't want it to be too tight. Obviously, you don't want to break anything. That would be really anticlimactic. So roll this fella up as straight and as evenly as you can. And once you get to a certain point, like that right there, you can see the end connectors here. By the way, these connectors on the other side, remember, we don't have to do that because these were polished down before the installation. If you're asking, well, John, why don't you just do that to these ones too? The answer is it's very hard to do that because of how small the surface area is on that. You could try it, but don't be surprised if you lose a few parts to lost part. Yeah, it's more easily done when it's actually secured to the track like this here. So what you're going to do is then you're just going to take the snail, put it onto the sandpaper, and just lightly move it in a circular form like that. And it'll slowly but surely go ahead and polish down the pieces. This is one of those things where higher the grit, the sandpaper, the more efficient it'll be. It's just that this is right now the smallest stuff I got, so I'll make do with this. And you don't want to put any force on it, you're just gliding it, kind of like playing like Ouija, I guess, the best way to describe it. So just like the way you see it here. And there you go. So once these are polished away, it's very smooth. And at this point, we're ready for the next step. And this takes us to painting. But before I do that, I gotta mention one thing about these workable tracks, and I've learned this time and time again, is that when the tracks are in this type of manner over here, they are the most, bad luck prone items that you can possibly imagine. They are very frail, very fragile, and repairing them is a bit of a pain in the ass. And so, of course, these things are a magnet for all sorts of calamity to happen at this point. Really, until these are secured to the tank, this is like the danger zone. So, I've had situations where I've dropped them and they cracked, or even more stupid, like the bottle glue falls on them and breaks one. It's like they're just magnet prone. Even after paint work, I remember on one of my other builds years and years ago, they were painted. I had a tub of like turpentine just sitting there, and the tracks were in paint, drying, and of course one slipped off the table, landed in the tub full of turpentine. You literally can't make this crap up. So basically what I'm saying is that tick tock, you gotta really be careful at this point here. And once you're at this point, you want to move to the finish line, not as fast as you possibly can, because that could, cause some problems too, and that's how you can make mistakes, but as carefully and as cautiously and swiftly as you possibly can. Once they're on the tank, the model becomes, it becomes much more resilient, but in this configuration here, yeah, they just are just magnets for calamity to happen. So yeah, Murphy is a real bastard in that case. So now, with that out of the way, when it comes to paint work, this is where, you could just use some El Cheapo type stuff. So for this, I'm going to go with rattle can spray paint. I'm going to go with my usual method of just El Cheapo, Home Depot brand of flat black. You can utilize, Tamiya for acrylics for that, but because these things are made out of polystyrene, the risk of melting that you can have with the single piece vinyl tracks is eliminated almost immensely. The only paints you want to watch out for, oddly enough, are the more pricier ones, like the Krylons or the Rust-Oleums. Those paints tend to be a bit harsher, and because of that, they may cause issues with the polystyrene that the tracks are made of, and I have seen in the past the polystyrene actually get damaged because of that paint that was used. This, oddly enough, is not really the case with the cheap stuff. And by cheap stuff, this is literally the stuff I use. These are the type of stuff you find in the Home Depot. Of course, obviously, I'm in the United States. And these things run like about 90 or 85 cents a can, depending where you go or if they're on sale or not. And they're awesome for plastic models. The more expensive brands, like, again, the Rust-Oleum and Krylon, they're like $4 a can. and they're not really the best for this. So this is one of those few times where actually saving money is actually the better way to go. Generally, when you cheap out on something, you get what you pay for. This is the one few case where that's not really how it works. I will say Lowe's also is a substitute for paint, but it's not as good as the Home Depot stuff. It's okay, I've utilized in the past, but compared to the two, I prefer the Home Depot one. It just sprays better, it has a better consistency, and requires less coats compared to the Lowe's brand. Walmart is another one. The Walmart brand of Quick Color, I guess it's called, or Color Place. The Color Place paints. Those ones are also on the same level. If I'm not mistaken, if I had a hunch, I'd say that they all come from the same company. But they just changed the labels on them. However, word of the wise, generally if they come in this type of a can, the paint seems to be better than the ones that come in this like curved bullet type can. Those ones tend to be a little bit more runnier, so that's why I'm lending to guess it might be just a subcontractor that's making these things. But by and large, El Cheapo can is the best can. So I'm gonna go ahead and get these things painted. In addition to painting the track bands themselves, I'm going to be painting several of the duckbills and the end connectors separately with the same paints, of course, so everything blends in. And I'm also going to be painting a few track links loose, and that is just in case of an insurance policy. A lot of times, even though the instructions will say a certain set number, I have had situations where it tended to be a little too tight, and it was the build definitely was better by adding an extra link or two depending on the vehicle. So in order to just cover your bases, I like to paint some extra track links just as a what if type situation arises. It saves time. You don't have to repaint everything, and also since using the same colors, it blends in much easier. So that is definitely something that's a tip when you're working on these type of models with these workable tracks. So normally this would be the equivalent of committing seppuku on a tank model. You never, ever, ever want to mess with the track teeth themselves. But again, for this situation here, it definitely warrants it. So to do this, I need to do the procedure to 8 of the teeth. So 16 total. 8 on one side, and of course you have to do the exact same procedure to the ones on the reverse. So to do this, I have my Dremel right over here, and here goes my bit, which is a router bit, and this one actually is in metric, so it's 2.40 millimeters, or 0.0945 for those who are not. And this, again, purchased from the vendor that I mentioned before, and of course, as it always turns out, I always film this part after I already do the initial portion where I said it didn't require tools. So, I'll probably have to make an amend to that. Regardless, I'm going to go ahead and take the Dremel, and I'm just going to carve away evenly at the two areas right here and here. And it's going to look something like this. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6, 7, and number 8. Okay, so you can see those over there. I'm going to do the exact same procedure to the ones on the opposite side, and then when I'm done with that, I'm going to do a dry test fit onto the track band itself. And after you make enough adjustments, the sprocket more or less will time where it needs to go. Not gonna lie though, these sprockets do suck. If there's one thing that could be improved on this kit, it could definitely be the sprockets. But regardless, I should still be able to progress with the remainder of the build accordingly. The tracks are going to progress into paint at this point, and the sprockets are also going to be touched up. By touching it up, this is just done with a paintbrush. I take the base coat and I just go over these areas here of the teeth that had the paint, or I should say the material, removed. As for how much material is removed, that's quite a bit. And yeah, I still wasn't able to get it to mesh perfectly, but it's definitely good enough for the for the project at hand. But again, this is definitely the biggest ding on the kit, and it's literally like pulling a hamstring between third base and home plate. for a home run. I mean, it really is kind of frustrating that they dick this up in this regard. Regardless, that's going to be more or less the topic for the actual model showcase video, so stay tuned for that. But nothing much more to discuss over here. Let's go ahead and get everything painted. So before I was getting into paint, I went to try to test the track fit around the sprocket again to see if, you know, any more hand fitting could be done. And when I did, lo and behold, I broke one of the pins. And I'm kind of glad that it happened so that I could actually show the repair process. So at this point here, the duck bill has been removed and the piece is being drilled out. So here I have my pin vise with that small Dremel bit that I mentioned earlier. And I'm just going ahead and carefully and slowly doing the drilling. This is one you have to be very careful with because precision is going to be absolutely required. Otherwise you can yaw and bend and that could just cause some other complications, neither of which are any good. Okay, so I have that drilled pretty deep. This peg here, I don't know if it's compromised. It's just bent, but it's not cracked. That one was cracked too. That one would have to also go. Alright, so with that cleaned out, I'm also going to clean out the end connector. Although I have ample as spare, I'm going to go ahead and still just try to recycle this one just to show you that it can be done. So one of the holes is fine. The one that's clogged up is the one that was glued, as you can see right here. So hopefully the camera's in focus. Be able to tell better in post, but just want to find the point. The Dremel bit generally self-indexes itself where it needs to go. And then you just carefully drill accordingly. And there we go. With the size of this bit here, it's basically the same exact size of the peg, so that once the part is compromised, or the peg is compromised, it just, you know, flakes away in the manner that you see there. Okay, so from this point onward, I'm going to grab one of my small sewing pins that I have right here. And I'm going to go ahead and pre-trim it to shape. So I'm going to make it about 1/8 of an inch long. So what is that, about 3, maybe 4 millimeters? 3 millimeters should be suffice. And I'm going to use the cleanest part here of my dingy, messed up, old, and abused wire snips. You want to have it as clean cut as possible because if there's any burrs on it, it's going to interfere with both the installation of the part or the installation of the end connector. So just go ahead and get this properly orientated. Okay, there it is in the plier. I'm just going to add a small drop of glue on this guy. Like so. And let's go ahead and install it in place. Appears that I drilled the hole deeper than the actual metal itself, which is good. But you have to be careful not to over-install, because if you do, and the glue sets, you're screwed. Okay, so as you can see, the pin has been restored. I'm just going to little drop of glue back on the metal part. And just going to carefully pivot this guy in place. Like I stated before, this is one of those things where if something breaks, generally when things go sideways, it goes sideways in a catastrophic manner. Where generally when you break one, you'll end up breaking 2 or 3 just with handling now the compromised section. So, but once it's been repaired, good as new. So, now I could go ahead and finally get the things painted. Here we have the tracks fully painted, weathered, and ready for installation. The tracks themselves, like I stated before, were painted with overall a can of flat black spray paint, and then I go ahead and use different types of paint to weather them to the condition that we see here. So the weathering consists of a wash of Tamiya NATO Black, as well as a thinned out cream color, and both of these are applied via the airbrush. The metal surfaces are dry brushed with the scratched metal look that you see, and then the inner portion here are painted with Tamiya Rubber Black, and there's a reason for that. So also at this time, I want to mention that a lot of people out there, they misunderstand a lot of the materials that these tracks are made of, some of which are due in part because they're a veteran and they served on either the M60 or the M1 Abrams or either any other type of modern contemporary tank, and they seem to think that these tracks here are the same type of composition, and that's just not the case. They resemble the modern tracks with the overall shape and design, definitely the design, the way everything bolted together and is affixed. However, the composition is very different on these older generation of tracks. So really quick, here you get to see the inner portions. And if I flip this guy over, you get to see what the outer section looks like with the chevron detailing. So, like I stated before, modern tracks are basically a giant rubber block with a steel skeleton molded on the inside, or I should say, there's a steel skeleton with the rubber molded on the outside, and that gives you, you know, that big rubber chunky chevron look that you see on the, you know, the M60 and the M48 and so on. But on these older type tracks, specifically the ones found on the M26 Pershing, the M46 Patton, and also the exact same design was utilized on the M4A3E8, and also on some of the other VVSS Sherman links, but that's another story. The track was actually comprised of two components. We have a steel section found on the face here, and that's the section with the chevron, and then on the inner portion there was a rubber pad that the road wheel will sit on. And just to be clear, I will go ahead and throw up a picture of the real track link of one of these Patton type tracks, and you can see the composition right now on the screen. So I'm not talking out of my rear end here. That's how these old tracks were found. And why this is very relevant is that if you're building a model, you want to weather and paint the parts accordingly, and a lot of people out there, if they don't understand the different materials, they'll weather them improperly and it'll just hinder the look as opposed to helping it. So that is definitely something you want to pay attention to and do your homework on when you're finishing out a model like the one that you see here. Here's the track fitted to one side of the model, and I'm going to go ahead and go through the installation process on the reverse side. On this side, I noticed that the links were actually slightly too long by one link, so I shortened it in order to get it to the appearance that you see here, but we'll see if that's also going to be necessary for the one on the reverse side. But it's only one way to find out. So I'm going to take the track, and I'm going to pre-time it onto the sprocket. Normally this is a great procedure to do, but this is specifically going to be true on this one because of the sprocket mod that I made earlier. Of course, you want to have the track at the proper orientation. With this one here, it's a bit easier because only one side has the extenders on it, so that's one less thing you have to worry about. So I'm going to go ahead and find the master link, and I'm going to have the, and obviously you have to know where to put the master link. If you have the thing pre-timed on the sprocket and the two track sections be on the top portion under the sponson, that's going to be a bit of a problem. So the best thing is to have it meet up at any portion on the bottom of the vehicle. Alright, make sure the sprocket is on appropriately. And now it's time for the fun bit, to time the sprocket. It's really tricky to get on camera, but to time the sprocket around this track, and you have to find that magic sweet spot because of the teeth mod that I made earlier. Okay. That seems to be it. Okay. Let me go ahead and readjust the camera. So I'm going to take the length of track. I'm basically going to slide it into place. As you can see, this is why, like I mentioned before, it's good not to have the return rollers fitted at this time. You get to the one sweet spot of the sprocket. It should just press fit in place. On this model, before I went ahead and did anything, I made sure that the sprockets and the front idler over here actually fit onto their locations in a nice smooth manner. Remember that there were some layers of paint and varnish built up on these areas, and this can inhibit the actual installation. Alright, so once you have that looped, the section should plug together, and unlike the one on the opposite side, looks like 113 links is more than suffice for this one. So as you can see, here goes the joiner track. It just squeezes together just like so. Because they're painted, the paint kind of acts in holding it in place, which is good. I'm going to bring the camera in closer so you get to see the final component install. Okay, so I'm going to start with the duck bill because it's the easiest one to get a hold of. Make sure it's on the right way. This is the only link where I don't use adhesives to hold it in place. It's just not necessary. With the layers of paint built up, it should be more than suffice at holding it in place where it needs to be. Whatever you do, do not put a lot of force on the component. When the holes line up, the part should just slide directly into place. Again, getting it on camera is actually more challenging than doing the procedure normally. And there we go, that guy is seated. Alright, time to do the same thing to the one on the opposite side. And Alright, so track is now installed on the model. At this point here, the only thing I need to do is to install the last section of the return rollers that will complete the look on this section over here, and then at that point there, the track is installed on this vehicle. And here's the model fully completed. At this point here, it's actually ready to be put on display. But before that, of course, we'll go through its filming processes and all that good stuff. But as for the purposes of this video, you can see what the suspension looks like with the final row of wheels fitted in place. And it is a mirror image on the opposite side. Overall, the track does an excellent job for the purposes that it's required for. I will come out and say, just because the tracks are workable, that does not mean that this thing is in any way, shape, or form a pushable toy. If you're looking for that, you're not going to be happy with what you have here. These tracks they're meant for a static model like the one that you see presently. In the end, what are my final thoughts on the workable tracks that are supplied with this kit? Well, the tracks are excellent. It is actually a very nice feature that Hobby Boss went with this track manufacturing method as opposed to phoning it in and going with a static individual link and length, which is seen on several other kits from Trumpeter, as well as also the TACCOM renditions of the exact same kit. And for that purpose alone, I really do prefer the Hobby Boss ones in that manner. The tracks are nicely executed. However, the biggest Achilles heel that they do have are with the timing on the sprocket. That is something that really does need to be refined. Perhaps someone out there can make a replacement sprocket that better times with the stock tracks, but that's something that is up for the market to solve. As for the out-of-the-box parts, yes, as you can see, you can utilize them to build the model that you see here, and everything you see is stock out of the box, specifically in relation to the suspension and the tracks that I've showed in this video. In many ways, the tracks, in my opinion, are very similar to the ones from AFV Club, but these ones here are a bit more robust and seem to be a bit more improved compared to the AFV Club counterpart. Those tracks are basically the exact same things you see here, but are much more frail because of the design and are a little bit more complex because of the tooth being a separate entity. With these ones here, having the tooth integrally molded on, this greatly improves the tracks and makes the assembly go by much easier and less problematic. As I mentioned earlier, these tracks are not sold as aftermarket and are purely just supplied with the T29 kit. Having said that, I'm pretty sure you could find a set loose out there on eBay. There are people that sell kits in a parted out nature, and perhaps these tracks are something that you could possibly run into. If anyone is watching this video and they see the track assembly and are saying to yourself, you know what, John, that's great and all, but it's way too fiddly for me, is there another option available? And the answer actually is yes. There is an aftermarket supplier out there producing tracks for this exact vehicle with the duckbills, no less, that are made out of cast metal. Those tracks appear to be an excellent choice and perhaps are something to look into for future builds. I, for one, am definitely going to be picking up a couple sets if/when I ever look into getting the TACCOM renditions of the exact same vehicle for a reason that should be fairly obvious. The metal ones do cost a little bit more. You're talking about 70 bucks, which is almost basically the same price as the kit. But if you're looking for a track solution that's a bit easier to put together compared to these plastic ones here, the metal ones are definitely something to look into, but that's going to be a topic for another video for another day. Regardless, as what the kit gives you, what you see here is basically what you see is what you get. And with that, that wraps up this 1/35 scale track link review and tutorial video for the 1/35 scale workable track links for the Hobby Boss T29 Heavy Tank model. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being other 1/35 scale workable track tutorial videos like the one that you saw here, or my usual type of content, which would basically include 1/35 scale and smaller scale model showcase videos, and my larger 1/6 scale project update videos when they frequently get posted. Another way to keep in loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There, I have more photographs of this particular build, as well as the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been seen on this channel previously. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again. I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. Till then.